Hello Internet, welcome back to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you about books, music and movies that I find interesting, that I enjoy, or a combination of the two. I am a man who doesn't learn, and although I have discovered that if I upload videos on Fridays, nobody watches them, Friday is also the day when new music is often released. And I am so excited about the new album from Clipping that I've decided to make a video about it today and upload it so that I can get it out into the world on the day that the album was released. Clipping are a band from Los Angeles, California. They've been active since 2010. Originally, they were a project by two producers called Jonathan Snipes and William Hudson. And the two of them were interested in like noise, power electronics, stuff like White House, kind of noisy ambient industrial. And they started doing a remix project where they were putting rap acapellas over these kind of soundscapes. Then in 2010, Daveed Diggs joined the band, and Daveed Diggs is a writer. I believe he makes films. He was also known for being the star of the Broadway show Hamilton. But in the context of Clipping, he's a rapper, and he has like quite a recognizable, slightly monotone, very fast flow that he uses quite often. And he writes extremely complex lyrics. So together, the three of them have made several albums and a series of EPs, and all of their material is very conceptual. For example, one of my favorite albums by them is called Splendor and Misery. It's from 2016, and this is like a sci-fi concept album about a slave on an intergalactic slave ship who comes out of stasis. He's the only person on the living on the ship, except for the ship's computer, who falls in love with him. This protagonist discovers an archive on the ship where he discovers slave songs and spirituals recorded from the early 20th century, like Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, which is a kind of recurrent motif through the album. And he listens to this while he's piloting the ship out into the cosmos. Just an incredible album. My other favorite album from them is the second in a two-album series based on horror movies. This album is called Visions of Bodies Being Burned from 2020. And this album, it's like really sonically creative, quite abrasive at times. And Diggs is telling all these kind of horror stories in the you form, always talking about you do this, you see this. A great example of like how clipping often works is there's a song on that album that's based on Candyman, the horror film, which is obviously referencing the film in quite a kind of terrifying and disturbing way, but it's also a metaphor for racist American parents scared that their white daughters will have sex with black men when they go to college. All right, so that brings us to this album, which, like all of their, maybe not their first, but like most of their major albums, at least, it's released on Sub Pop, the Seattle label that released, among other things, Mark Lanigan, Nirvana, Shabazz Palaces. And this new album, which is called Dead Channel Sky, is a cyberpunk album. A cyberpunk is a genre of sci-fi that combines dystopian literature, noir, like crime or thriller writing, and kind of cyberspace, internet, computer based, Android type material. The term cyberspace originally comes from one of the earliest cyberpunk novels, which is Neuromancer by William Gibson. And if you're interested in William Gibson, I recommend his book Pattern Recognition. That's a really great novel. Okay, so wait a minute, I'm getting kind of confused. Yeah, so this album, Clipping have said, is a cyberpunk album. They said this from when the first single came out, and it kind of is completely in their wheelhouse because they work a lot with like the overlap of like sound and concept and text, and this album really gives them the opportunity to like play with electronics and glitchy electronic sounds and intertwine that with these narratives around capitalism, dystopianism, the internet, science fiction. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the like main tracks on the album and just talk about my experience of listening to them, what I think they're about thematically, and kind of how I feel about them. Caveat being the album came out today, I work full time and I've listened to the album twice. So this is also an invitation for you to get in the comments and tell me what you think about the album, what you think it's about, what you think the songs are about. As you can probably tell, even if you haven't listened to them before, Clipping's music is super dense. So there's no way that I've understood everything on the basis of 2 listens. Okay, so all Clipping albums start with an intro where Daveed Diggs does a kind of very fast poem over some kind of sound effects or background, and kind of gives you a little sense of what the album is about. And he does that again on this album. He always finishes it by saying it's Clipping. On this album, the music behind him is basically a collage of the sound of dial-up internet, like the weird kind of distorted sounds that the internet used to make when you were connecting it to a landline telephone. And at the end of the intro, this dial-up sound becomes even more distorted so that it turns into what sounds like a human scream. You're already getting the sense on this intro of like this album being about the intersection between technology, the internet, and, you know, terror, horror, humanity stuck within the mainframe. Then this goes straight into the first main song, which is called Dominator. And straight away on Dominator, the synth sounds and the kind of rhythms remind me of acid house, like 80s electronic music, early dance music, early rave music from the same period where cyberpunk was kind of becoming a genre. I think that's very deliberate because it sounds more retro in a way than Clipping's music usually does. And Daveed Diggs, when he comes in with this more like old school flow which you might have heard over like early techno, and he says like what is it, I've written it down, what does he say? Once again back, it's the incredible, guess the feeling wasn't indelible, masticated up all the edibles, still ain't tripping. So like he's starting a story about having eaten all the edibles, like trying to get stoned, but once again back, it's the incredible sounds like something from like KLF or some kind of rap over an early acid house track. But then he switches the flow and he starts using what as he often does, like a very kind of fast, intricate flow. And what he's talking about there is, if it's television or the internet, early internet, or just media in general, about capitalism within technological media. And he says audiences are infinitely more valuable when they're thinking they're ugly and acting fat and unfashionable. Talking about how like technology and media, or like capitalist media, making people feel bad about themselves in order to be able to exploit them financially. And as it goes on, it seems like the story he's telling is about how the capitalist class, through advertising and media manipulation, makes the public feel so bad about themselves that they'll buy into participating in becoming technology, uploading their consciousness into a machine, bionic bodies. And this thing about the Dominator, it seems to be like being able to be this ideal sexual subject within like a bionic body. And the music becomes increasingly industrial through the track as this story is being told. The next track, Change the Channel, I believe that was a single. It has a kind of punk vibe to it. It's not my favorite track on the album, but what I do really like about it is where the first track was referencing acid house. This is kind of referencing the music of like Sega or Nintendo, like early consoles. So again, it's like referencing back to sounds from the beginning of the information age, the beginning of this cyberpunk dystopia that we're arguably living in now. Track four, Run It, that was a single. It was the first single I heard. I think it was the first single from the album. It's like a story of a drug dealer who is kind of traveling around and like making drugs, selling drugs, relatively high up the chain of supply, it seems like, who thinks they're not addicted, but they are addicted. And I guess it's like some kind of futuristic designer drug. The rhyme scheme is super complicated and it kind of repeats in chunks. So even though the song like doesn't actually have a repeating chorus, it kind of sounds like it does because the rhymes are the same in the chorus section, like the endings of the words, the rhyme schemes are the same, even though the words are different. So it gives it this kind of catchy feel, even though you never really hear much kind of in the way of repeated material. Uh, that's such a clever trick that Daveed Diggs has pulled off on that. The sounds of the synthesizers remind me of like music programs that my friends used to mess around with in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And this is like a music geek thing, but there's a snare delay or like echo on the drum hit that comes every seventh hit. So you think you know where it's going to be. It's always one beat earlier, so it's like it's on a circle, like a long circle through the track. Eventually it comes back round to being where you think it would have been. After Run It, which is really an incredible song, there are a couple of interludes that are maybe not like strong tracks within themselves, but in the context of the album they kind of create a little bit of space between these otherwise very dense narrative tracks. And then the next main song is a song called Code, which is track 7. Again, on this one, they're kind of referencing earlier styles, and this is the one that I think I've never heard Clipping do like a futuristic version of an old style as obviously as they're doing here. They've taken like a sort of G Funk, Dr. Dre, Warren G, Snoop Dogg type of groove, and they've kind of turned it into like a more like futuristic cyberpunk version of that sound. And even Daveed Diggs, he's doing a rap flow that is like referencing old school rap or like Bling era. No, not even Bling, like just like a bit earlier, like gangster rap flow. And he starts telling this story about how like you're dressed up, you got like your new clothes on, you're looking good, and you go down to see meet the people on the street. But it's within a digital environment. So he's saying like fresh new skin for the avatar, just plugged into the boulevard. And the song's called Code, and the refrain is talk code to him. And I think he's playing with like being on code, like like you know, kind of doing what's expected within the community. Code like a like slang code, like a like coded language in a way of speaking, but also computer coding, like the code language code that you write computer programs with. And what I think the kind of concept of the song is like in the background is this idea that within the computer world or within the game or within the simulated environment online, you can play a character who is unlike your real person, your real persona, or your like in real life persona. So like if you were using the kind of language that you are using online in real life, people would think you were like obviously a loser and you might get beaten up for talking the way that you're talking. But in Grand Theft Auto, you can play a gangster, or like maybe online, you can pretend you're part of a racial community that you don't actually belong to in your day to day life. Track 8 is called Dodger. I think this is a short story about a world where everybody is kind of plugged into a mainframe or like plugged into the internet, and you have a kind of dystopian government or state who are like, okay, if you have nothing to fear, if you're innocent, then you will plug in, and if you don't plug in, it means that you're obviously a criminal, um, and or a dissident. And within this, somebody introduces a virus to like kill the president. So it's kind of implied that there's like a kind of cybersecurity force trying to find the virus, whether the virus maybe is a person, because at the end it becomes the story of someone running away or trying to escape. Musically, there's a punk influence again, and it starts with David Diggs doing this like very fast rapping that he often does. It's almost like da 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 da. But in the second verse, he starts it with like triplets, where he's like da 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 da, and then as I say, it becomes this narrative about a person, a kind of rebellious figure, like escaping. And as this story is being told, strings come in. I think they sound like this, like an actual symphony orchestra, or like at least like real string players been recorded with original music. And it's just, I'm not joking. Like, I don't think I shed a tear, but I was very close. It's so beautiful. This track, Dodger, is just so beautiful. The next track is another interlude. It's called Malleus. I don't know what that's a reference to. It has the avant-garde guitarist Nels Klein playing on it. It's basically the beat from Dodger with Nels Klein playing guitar over the top, improvising. Um, it's kind of noisy. It's playing around with electronics. It suits the concept of the record. I don't think it sounds like as interesting as a lot of the other stuff. It's followed by a track called Scams, which it's the one that sounds closest to their previous album, Visions of Bodies Being Burned. It's like less kind of glitchy electronic, more in a kind of hybrid hip hop type of sound. Um, David starts kind of telling this story about a woman who is in a kind of post apocalyptic, post climate change society where there's like power outages. It seems to be quite chaotic. Somebody called Tia Namone comes in and tells a first person story of this woman uh, who seems to be like hustling, trying to make money, doing in different ways. But I can't say that I fully understand the narrative of this song yet. I do really like the sound of it, and I do really love the feature. The song after this is a song called Keep Pushing, which seems to be like another futuristic drug selling song. Although I wonder if the drugs or the pushes are like a metaphor for something, which I haven't quite figured out yet. Either way, David has this like effortless, very slick flow through the whole song. There's a melodic refrain where this kind of repetitive synthesizer does a kind of call and return with like pianos, and then towards the end there's strings again. It's a very pretty sounding song. It reminds me a little bit of the stuff off of Splendor and Misery. After this, another interlude called From Bright Bodies. Don't have a lot to say about that. And then there's a track called Mood Organ, which seems to be the story of an ambush, maybe in a hotel. I don't know why I've got this idea of it being in a hotel, but it's about some people lying in wait for somebody else. It's kind of like a very noiry, kind of almost like a short story, like a William Gibson short story about somebody being attacked, who's kind of on some sort of spy mission or something. It has maybe my favourite line on the whole album on it, where he says, thumbing through paperbacks just to remember the feeling, as if you're living in a world where the only time you touch a book is to nostalgically remember what it felt like to turn paper pages. After Mood Organ, there's a track called Polaroids. This is like the most virtuosic writing you will ever hear. Um, it's the type of writing that you could win awards for. It starts with this super detailed description of a funeral. This sounds kind of like a poem or like a modernist novel, and then it keep as the description keeps going, it's actually descriptions of other things, and then you realize that it's a description of a series of photographs, the Polaroids in the title of the song. Um, and in the chorus, it explains that these Polaroids are in a box tucked under the bed, uh, and the song describes like conflicting impulses to look at these pictures and try to understand the past and how the past has led to the situation that the protagonist lives in now. and a contrasting impulse to forget the past, don't think about it, don't look at the pictures, hide them, just get drunk, smoke weed, don't think about it. You get the impression that maybe thinking about the past is not allowed in this society, or it's actively discouraged because nobody wants you to understand who was responsible for the cataclysm that brought about the current situation. But there are little clues, implied clues in the pictures, like fiber optics stretching into the jungle, and it describes one picture as being before the riots. This song is, it's like goose pimple inducing writing. There's a couple more interludes after this, which I haven't got to know them very well yet, so I don't have much to say about the interludes except to say that they give Clipping the opportunity to like play with the sonic side of these pictures, and it's more like abstract. It reminds me maybe more of like abstract paintings between these more like figurative narratives. And then the next track is a track called Mirror Shades Part 2. Now, mirror shades, like, mirrored sunglasses. Mirror Shades was uh, quite an influential cyberpunk anthology book that was edited by Bruce Sterling. So this is like, the follow-on, like a sequel to that anthology. And I guess in a way you could say that like the whole album is like a cyberpunk anthology like that book. This song is maybe the only one that is almost humorous. Like it's very playful. It's got like a danceable kind of beat to it. Um, you got Daveed Diggs explaining like, here we wear our mirror shades, here they wear their mirror shades, and then asking, "Are you cool with that?" And then somebody called Cartel Madras, who I don't know. She comes in and she like answers him like, "I'm cool with that," and then she starts describing her character. Her character is a woman who seems to be like have lived a very difficult life, but is like sort of somebody who goes to the clubs and is around in the party scene, um, a bit paranoid, but also kind of tough, standing with her back against the wall with her mirror shades on. She says, "Find me in the belly of the rave." She says, "Wake up in tears, the dawn is upon us." And then she asks this question like, "What if I look so fine when I die?" And it's almost as if she wants to be in the coffin with her mirror shades on. For those of you who have been like interested in abstract hip hop or like alternative hip hop over the years, Mirror Shades actually really reminds me of an album that Mike Ladd did, which was under the name The Majesticons, which was kind of like a sort of satirical West Coast rap album that was like critical of like the bling scene and all of that like very um, kind of consumerist rap music from the early 2000s. This song kind of reminds me of that. It's not a parody song, but it has like a certain sort of satirical, sarcastic aspect to it, I think. But it's also like a storytelling song, and I think it's supposed to be kind of more fun. The next track, And You Called, is another interlude. It's basically a human voice down a phone, but it's so distorted you can't hear it. So again, it's like this human in the machine, or the machine is a person type of creepy overlap. And then the last two tracks on this album are just incredible. So the first of them is called Welcome Home Warrior. Welcome Home Warrior was a single. It features Aesop Rock, who is one of my favorite ever rappers. It starts off with Daveed Diggs describing this kind of like I don't play these kind of games. I don't really play any computer games, but like World of Warcraft or Elden Ring or something, like a kind of olden style like fantasy universe. It seems to be describing a man who feels insignificant and inconsequential in his real life, entering or returning to this game, going back to his guild, uh, to a place and a time, an imaginary place and time where he can feel significant. And the people in the game are like, "Welcome home, warrior. Everyone is proud of you." Then Aesop Rock comes in and he says, "Everyone is proud of me." And then he describes like his gameplay and like fighting enemies and being tough and like describing this environment in like this really complex poetic way. And then he starts describing the environment that he's sitting in while he's playing the game. He seems to be sitting in a room with no windows, where he's hung like light boxes on the walls with pictures of nature, so that it feels like that, like he's surrounded by a natural environment. And he talks about smelling flowers for the first time, but these flowers are like projected onto the wall. So he sniffs the flowers and says, "Smells like drywall." His verse ends with him saying, "Fire on four sides, I didn't even notice." Like he's sitting there playing the game so engrossed that he doesn't notice his house is burning down. The last song, "Ask What Happened," it seems to almost be like referring back to Polaroids, like this question of like, how did we get into the situation that we're in now? And it starts with Tibetan prayer bowls, or what sounds like Tibetan prayer bowls, or some kind of similar sounding like bells, very kind of sort of quiet and beautiful sounds. And then David comes in with this very fast flow, and he seems to be like referring to a lot of social events from like our history, like our world. Like I hear him talking about trickle down economics and Reagan, about the Iran Contra scandal, about the Central Park Five, this group of black men who were wrongly convicted of rape. So he's talking about the overlap of like capitalism, racism, oligarchy, and technology. And again, referencing a time, when cyberpunk was also being produced and being written, and like the beginnings of the internet. Then in the third verse, he seems to be starting to talk about the 90s. And at the same time, this drum beat comes in that's like a drum and bass beat, so which supports my thoughts that it's probably referencing the 90s. So it's almost like he's saying, "Ask what happened," from the 80s to the 90s and then up to today. And each chorus, he talks about how history and the future belong to the 1%. Like about how, the rich and powerful through technology control the past, they control the future, they control our understanding. And then the last chorus is like extended, and it keeps building up until the music sounds almost like Aphex Twin. Very like intense, complex, rich electronic outro that, I mean, is some of the best music I've heard for a long time. And then the album ends on the same dial-up scream that it began with. All right, that is my rundown of the Clipping album after having heard it twice. That's what I think is going on in this album. Have you heard it yet? What do you think about it? Do you like Clipping? Do you like cyberpunk? Have you got cyberpunk recommendations? Please hop in the comments. Let's have a conversation. I really like people responding to my videos. I love this album. I don't know if it's because it's new and I've been looking forward to it, but like the way I felt listening to it, I could easily have been disappointed because I was anticipating it so much. But I think this might be their best album, and I think it's probably going to be like top 5 album of the year for me. Friday. Have a nice evening. Have a good weekend. Bye bye.